The quantum monitoring station Epsilon 9 hung in the void like a forgotten jewel, its crystalline sensors perpetually scanning the infinite darkness between star systems. Normally, the station's corridors hummed with a quiet, almost monotonous routine. Today was different. Krina adjusted her multi-lens perception array, her four-fingered hands moving with practiced precision across the holographic interface. As a junior communications specialist of the Zalaxian Diplomatic Corps, she had drawn what most considered the most boring assignment in the Galactic Confederation: monitoring deep space quantum anomaly detection. The first warning came as a subtle vibration, a microscopic tremor in the fabric of space-time that most species wouldn't even register. But the Epsilon 9 sensors were designed to detect the slightest perturbations, quantum whispers that spoke of impossible movements and uncharted phenomena. "Sensor lead," Krina called out, her translator implant converting her native clicks and whistles into standard galactic communication. "I'm detecting an unusual quantum signature." Tharik, her senior officer, didn't even look up from his nutrient consumption tablet. "Probably another quantum echo. File it in the standard report." But Krina knew this was different. The quantum signature didn't behave like any known transit method. It wasn't the smooth quantum slip of Andromedan explorers or the jagged quantum tears of Krex mining vessels. This was something else entirely, a signature that seemed to fold and unfold space itself, creating patterns that defied conventional understanding. The station's primary quantum mapping system began to light up in colors that shouldn't exist in standard visual spectrums. Ultraviolet merged with infrared, creating impossible hues that made Krina's peripheral vision ache. The quantum signature was building, growing more complex with each microsecond. "Senior lead," she called again, her voice now carrying an edge of urgency. "This is not a standard quantum event." Zarek finally looked up, his membranous eye stalks extending fully. The quantum display was now consuming the entire monitoring chamber, a three-dimensional representation of something emerging from somewhere else. The emergence was unlike any vessel transit they had ever recorded. It wasn't a simple appearance or a standard quantum slip. This was more like a living calculation solving itself in real time, with space itself becoming a computational medium. Geometric patterns of impossible complexity began to coalesce, forming the outline of a vessel that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. "Communication channels," Krina muttered, her fingers dancing across multiple interface layers, attempting to establish contact protocol. But there was no standard protocol for what was happening. The vessel, if it could be called a vessel, seemed to be constructing itself as it emerged, its hull shifting and adapting. Metallic surfaces rippled like liquid, absorbing and reflecting light in ways that suggested the material was more than mere metal. It was thinking, adapting, existing in a state between matter and pure information. Zarek's translator implant began to emit a high-pitched whine. "Impossible," he whispered. "The quantum signature matches no known species database." Krina's hands were a blur across the communication systems. Standard protocols, emergency channels, diplomatic frequency bands. Nothing seemed adequate for this arrival. The vessel continued to emerge, its form suggesting both incredible complexity and a strange, almost organic simplicity. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the quantum event stabilized. The vessel hung in space, its surface still subtly shifting, like a living membrane breathing in the infinite darkness. No weapons systems were active. No aggressive stance was taken. It simply existed, a testament to technological capabilities that seemed to defy everything the Galactic Confederation understood about space travel. "Identification requested," Krina transmitted, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "Unknown vessel, please state origin and intent." The response, when it came, was unlike anything in the station's communication logs. Not a standard audio transmission, not a data packet, but a quantum-encoded message that seemed to carry meaning beyond simple language. It was an invitation, a statement of peaceful intent, and a demonstration of technological sophistication. all compressed into a single impossible communication burst. Krima knew, in that moment, that everything was about to change. The vessel had arrived, and it was human. The Grand Confederation Hall resembled a living organism more than a meeting space. Holographic representations shimmered and pulsed, each delegate a spectral echo of their home world's most influential leaders. The hall's architecture was a marvel of xenoengineering, capable of simultaneously supporting atmospheres, gravity conditions, and communication spectrums for 17 different species. Ambassador Lorak of the Trilateral Cluster stood first, his crystalline body refracting light in agitated patterns that betrayed deep emotional turbulence. "We cannot ignore the potential threat," he declared, his translation matrix converting his complex light-based communication into standard galactic speech. The human vessel represents an unknown variable that could destabilize centuries of carefully maintained galactic equilibrium. To his left, the gaseous representation of the nebular concordance flickered. Ambassador Zephyla's form more cloud than solid, her voice a complex harmonic that suggested both concern and curiosity. "Our historical archives are incomplete," she intoned, tendrils of luminescent vapor twisting with each word. "Humanity appears in our records as a paradox, simultaneously primitive and unexpectedly sophisticated." The emergency summit had been convened with unprecedented speed. The quantum monitoring station's initial report had spread through diplomatic channels faster than any known communication method. 17 species, each with their own complex history, fears, and potential motivations, now found themselves united by a single point of concern. A holographic reconstruction of the human vessel dominated the central chamber. It rotated slowly, revealing impossible geometries that seemed to challenge the very concept of physical design. Sensor logs scrolled alongside the image, each reading more perplexing than the last. The vessel didn't just move through space. It seemed to negotiate with space itself, bending quantum mechanics like most species might bend a piece of flexible material. "We have attempted multiple communication protocols," reported Chief Analyst Krina, her Xylaxian form now elevated to a position of unexpected importance. The young communications specialist who had first detected the vessel was now the primary source of information. "The vessel's response defies our standard decryption matrices. It's not that they're blocking our attempts. It's that their communication method is fundamentally different from anything in our databases." Ambassador Earthax of the Mechanical Consensus leaned forward, metallic appendages clicking with computational precision. "Preliminary analysis suggests their communication is simultaneously multi-layered and contextually adaptive. Each transmission carries multiple levels of meaning, with linguistic and technological content intertwined in ways our current systems can barely comprehend." The hall fell into a complex silence. This was more than a first contact scenario. This was a potential paradigm shift. Historical records were quickly retrieved and analyzed. Humanity appeared sporadically in galactic archives. Brief, often contradictory mentions. A species that had seemingly evolved on a single planetary system, yet demonstrated technological leaps that defied linear progression. Reports ranged from descriptions of primitive territorial conflicts to sudden, inexplicable technological innovations. "Our xenoarchaeological teams have found evidence of human adaptability that borders on the inexplicable," continued Zefla, her gaseous form swirling with holographic data streams. "They solve problems through methods that our most advanced computational systems cannot predict. Not through superior processing power, but through something else. A form of lateral thinking that seems to circumvent traditional problem-solving approaches." Lorak's crystalline body pulsed with agitation, which makes them dangerous. Unpredictability is not a diplomatic virtue. The vessel's initial communication had been decoded, partially. It was a request for communication protocols, but encoded in a way that suggested the humans were more interested in understanding the Confederation's communication methods than in providing their own information. "They're studying us," muttered Arthax, mechanical components whirring with what could only be described as intellectual excitement. "Not as a potential threat, but as a complex system to be understood. A junior diplomat from the Quantum Harmonics delegation spoke up, her voice trembling. What if they're not here to conquer? What if they're here to connect? The suggestion hung in the chamber like a dangerous possibility. 17 species, each with their own complex history of territorial disputes, political machinations, and carefully maintained balance of power, now faced the prospect of an entirely unknown variable. The human vessel waited, silent, patient, its very existence a challenge to everything the Galactic Confederation understood about interstellar relations. First contact had never felt so uncertain. The territorial dispute between the Orcs and Gemulon had festered for 317 standard galactic cycles. What began as a minor disagreement over resource-rich planetary systems in the Crimson Nebula had calcified into a conflict so complex that entire generations had been born, lived, and died without knowing peace. The Orcs, methane-breathing, silicon-based entities, occupied a series of gas giant moons. Their civilization existed in massive floating cities that drifted through dense atmospheric layers, processing minerals directly from the planetary environment. To them, territory was not about land, but about atmospheric composition and mineral density. The Gemulon, a crystalline species that communicated through intricate light refractions and electromagnetic pulses, viewed territorial control as a matter of quantum resonance. Their entire civilization was built around precise energy mappings of stellar regions. Each disputed planetary system represented a complex mathematical equation of potential and possibility. Neither species could comprehend the other's perspective. Diplomatic missions had failed precisely because translation was impossible. The Clorax's methane-based communication relied on chemical gradients and pressure variations. The Gemulon's communication was a symphony of light and electromagnetic frequencies. Between them lay an unbridgeable chasm of fundamental misunderstanding. Enter Captain Elena Rodriguez and her quantum communication specialists. The human vessel had been observing the conflict for precisely 72 hours, not through traditional surveillance, but through a method that seemed to involve listening to the very fabric of space-time itself. Their approach wasn't about gathering intelligence in the traditional sense. They were understanding the conflict at a level beyond language, beyond cultural context. "We're receiving an anomalous communication request," reported Dr. Aria Chen, the vessel's chief sinolinguistic analyst. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe and pulse with living information. "The humans are proposing a communication framework that doesn't translate. It's more like a negotiation algorithm." On the Confederation diplomatic channel, tension crackled like static electricity. The proposed human intervention was unprecedented. No species had successfully mediated a conflict between the Clorax and Gemulon before. The communication began unexpectedly. Instead of words or traditional diplomatic overtures, the human vessel began broadcasting a complex quantum signature that seemed to harmonize the fundamental communication frequencies of both species. It was less a translation and more a creation of an entirely new communication medium. Dr. Chen watched in fascination as the quantum algorithm unfolded. "They're not translating," she muttered. "They're creating a shared language from scratch." The Clorax representative, a massive entity composed of swirling methane crystals, initially responded with what could only be described as confusion. The Gemulon delegation, a collection of pulsing light formations, seemed equally perplexed. But something was happening. The quantum communication algorithm didn't just translate. It demonstrated. It showed the Clorax how the disputed planetary systems looked from the Gemulon perspective, not as territory, but as a complex energy network. Simultaneously, it revealed to the Gemulon the atmospheric potential of the Clorax's perspective, showing how mineral processing could be optimized in ways neither species had previously considered. "They're showing empathy through data," Dr. Chen realized. Not emotional empathy, but a kind of systemic empathy, understanding through complete information sharing. Within hours, what had seemed an impossible conflict began to transform. The humans weren't solving the dispute. They were helping both species see beyond their own limited perspectives. The breakthrough came when the human communication algorithm demonstrated a joint resource management strategy that would benefit both species. It wasn't a compromise. It was a completely new approach that rendered the original conflict irrelevant. Ambassador Lorak, watching from the Confederation diplomatic channel, could hardly believe the data streaming before him. "They didn't negotiate," he whispered. "They reimagined the entire problem." As the communication concluded, the Clorax and Gemulon representatives, who had entered the negotiation as long-standing enemies, were now discussing collaborative research initiatives. The territorial dispute that had lasted centuries had been resolved in less than a standard day. Captain Rodriguez's only comment, transmitted on a low-priority diplomatic channel, was characteristically understated. Sometimes, understanding is more powerful than agreement. The Galactic Confederation watched in stunned silence as the impossible became reality. The Confederation's Central Scientific Symposium had never experienced such profound silence. What began as a routine technology assessment had transformed into something entirely unprecedented. Dr. Lyra Kathax, lead xenotechnological researcher from the Quantum Harmonics Institute, stared at the holographic projection with a mixture of terror and academic excitement. The human medical scanner before her defied every known principle of diagnostic technology. "It's not just scanning," she muttered into her multispectral recording device. "It's communicating with biological systems." The demonstration had started simply enough. A representative from the human vessel, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, a specialist in xenobiological systems, had arrived with what appeared to be a handheld device. No larger than a standard datapad, it looked almost disappointingly simple compared to the massive diagnostic arrays used by various galactic civilizations. The first subject was a Xylex diplomat, a species so complex that their biological systems had previously required 3 separate scanning platforms and a team of specialized medical researchers to diagnose even basic health conditions. The Xylex possessed a biochemical structure that incorporated quantum entanglement as part of its cellular communication, making traditional medical scanning nearly impossible. Dr. Rodriguez's device touched the Xylex diplomat's primary sensory cluster for precisely 2.7 seconds. The results were instantaneous and impossible. Not only did the device provide a complete diagnostic of the diplomat's current health status, but it also projected potential genetic drift patterns, predicted metabolic changes for the next 73 standard cycles, and identified 3 previously undetected cellular anomalies that would have remained unnoticed for decades. The device is not scanning, Dr. Kathax realized, her own biochemical sensors going into overdrive. It's having a conversation with the subject's entire biological system. The symposium's representatives from 17 different species watched in stunned silence. The mechanical consensus delegation's computational arrays were working overtime, attempting to deconstruct the technology's methodology. Dr. Rodriguez explained with an almost casual demeanor that defied the revolutionary nature of the technology. "It's a quantum adaptive diagnostic interface," he said, as if describing something as mundane as a standard communication device. "We developed it to handle the complexities of interspecies medical support during deep space exploration." But it was more than a medical device. It was a window into a fundamentally different approach to technology. The next demonstration involved communication systems. The human team introduced a translation device that didn't just convert language. It understood context, emotional nuance, and cultural subtext in ways that made previous translation technologies seem like primitive signal processing. A nebular concordance representative, whose communication method involved complex light-based emotional resonances, spoke a single phrase. The human device not only translated the words but projected a holographic representation that captured the emotional landscape behind the statement. It showed not just what was said, but the intricate web of cultural, personal, and historical context that informed the communication. "We're not translating," explained Dr. Aria Chen, the human linguist, We're creating a comprehensive cultural bridge. The technological demonstrations continued. A quantum computing system that could solve complex multidimensional problems in microseconds. An energy generation technology that seemed to draw power directly from quantum fluctuations. Adaptive materials that could reconfigure themselves based on environmental needs. Each technology challenged fundamental understanding. These weren't incremental improvements. They represented paradigm shifts in how technology could interact with reality itself. Dr. Kathax realized something profound. These weren't just technological advances. They represented a fundamentally different relationship with technology, one where the boundary between tool and intelligence became blurred. The Mechanical Consensus Delegation's lead researcher summarized the collective sentiment. They don't create technology. They cultivate it. As the symposium concluded, one thing became abundantly clear. The human vessel represented more than a technological leap. It was a complete reimagining of what technology could be. The Galactic Confederation had encountered something far beyond a new species. They had encountered a new way of understanding existence itself. The hypernova's initial burst was silent in the vacuum of space, but its implications were catastrophic. The Xyrax cluster, a collection of 17 planetary systems housing over 300,000 sentient beings from multiple species, was moments away from total annihilation. Traditional evacuation protocols would have taken decades. The humans had 72 hours. Captain Elena Rodriguez studied the stellar cartography with an intensity that made her senior team uncomfortable. The holographic display showed a disaster of unprecedented scale. The dying star was collapsing in a way that defied standard astrophysical models, creating a cascading destruction sequence that would consume entire star systems. "We're not just moving people," Rodriguez muttered to her second-in-command, Commander David Chen. "We're rewriting the entire concept of survival." The human vessel's quantum displacement technology was unlike anything in galactic records. It wasn't about simple transportation. It was about understanding and manipulating the fundamental fabric of spacetime itself. Dr. Aria Chen, the vessel's xenobiological specialist, had already begun creating adaptive survival protocols for each of the affected species. The Xyrax cluster wasn't a single homogeneous population. It was a complex ecosystem of beings with radically different biological requirements. The methane-breathing Clorax inhabitants of the gas giant moons would require entirely different evacuation parameters compared to the silicon-based life forms of the crystalline planets. The quantum-entangled consciousness clusters of the outer planetary systems presented their own unique challenges. "We need a unified survival strategy," Dr. Chen explained to the assembled refugee coordinators. "That doesn't just move bodies, but preserves entire cultural and biological ecosystems." The first phase of the rescue began with what appeared to be impossibly precise quantum scanning. The human vessel didn't just detect life forms. It created a comprehensive map of each being's biological, cultural, and psychological ecosystem. Commander Chen activated the vessel's adaptive shielding systems. Unlike traditional energy shields, these were living, responsive systems that could reconfigure themselves based on the specific environmental needs of each rescued population. Quantum displacement initiating announced the vessel's primary navigation system, its voice a calm counterpoint to the impending stellar catastrophe. The rescue was not a simple transportation. It was a complex relocation that considered every minute detail of survival. Entire planetary ecosystems were carefully mapped, preserved, and prepared for potential reconstruction. Cultural archives were simultaneously backed up and prepared for potential restoration. The Confederation's emergency response teams watched in stunned disbelief. Rescue operations that would have taken multiple species decades were being completed in hours. First, quantum stabilization fields were established around each planetary system. These weren't simple protective barriers, but dynamic systems that could absorb and redistribute the massive energy of the collapsing star. Then, precise quantum displacement began. Entire populations were moved not just through space, but through carefully calculated quantum probability matrices. It wasn't teleportation in the traditional sense. It was a comprehensive relocation that preserved every quantum state of each being. "We're not just moving them," Dr. Arya Chen explained to the stunned Confederation observers. "We're ensuring their entire existential continuity." As the hypernova reached its critical point, the human vessel completed its rescue. 300,247 beings from 17 different species were relocated to a carefully prepared stellar cluster, complete with reconstructed environmental parameters that matched their original habitats. The most remarkable aspect wasn't the speed or the scale of the rescue. It was the completeness. Cultural archives were preserved. Biological diversity was maintained. Even the quantum-level interactions of complex ecosystem were carefully mapped and recreated. When the last quantum displacement completed, the Confederation's emergency response coordinator could only stare in disbelief. "How?" he asked Rodriguez. "Is this possible?" The human captain's response was characteristically understated. "We don't see obstacles," she said. "We see problems waiting to be solved." The dying star exploded in the background, a testament to the destructive power of the universe. But against that backdrop, something more profound had occurred. Humanity had demonstrated that survival was more than preservation. It was a complex, adaptive dance with the very fabric of existence. The Interstellar Cultural Exchange Station orbited a neutron star, its architecture a testament to galactic diversity. 17 different environmental zones seamlessly coexisted, each meticulously designed to support the unique physiological and psychological needs of multiple species. It was here that the true nature of human interaction began to unfold. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, not to be confused with her sister, Captain Rodriguez, led the Human Cultural Integration Team. Unlike traditional diplomatic missions, their approach was revolutionary. They weren't here to negotiate or establish protocols. They were here to understand. The first encounter involved the Luminary, a species of pure energy beings who communicated through complex electromagnetic resonances. Previous diplomatic missions had failed spectacularly. The Luminary's communication was so abstract that most species interpreted their interactions as random energy fluctuations. Dr. Rodriguez approached differently. Instead of attempting traditional communication, she introduced a quantum resonance device that could capture and interpret the Luminary's natural communication patterns. But more importantly, she arrived with something unexpected: pure curiosity. "Tell me about yourselves," she requested, her device creating a bridge between human understanding and luminary existence. The Confederation observers watched in disbelief. This wasn't diplomacy. This was something more profound. The mechanical consensus delegation had been particularly skeptical. Their civilization was built on pure logical interaction, viewing emotional and cultural exchanges as inefficient. Yet the human team demonstrated a form of communication that defied their computational models. In the station's methane-breathing zone, Dr. Marcus Chen engaged with the Clorax representatives. Where previous interactions had been limited to basic survival communication, Chen approached with a comprehensive understanding of their complex atmospheric biochemistry. He didn't just speak their language. He understood their fundamental existence. A Gemulon cultural historian observed the interactions with growing fascination. The humans weren't just collecting information. They were creating connections. Each interaction was a complex dance of mutual understanding, where the goal wasn't to categorize or control, but to comprehend. The most remarkable demonstration came during the quantum consciousness exchange with the Nebular Concordance. These beings existed as a collective consciousness, their individual identities merged in a complex quantum network. Previous attempts at individual communication had always failed. Dr. Arya Chen approached this challenge with a device that was part translation matrix, part quantum entanglement generator. Instead of trying to isolate individual consciousness, she created a communication framework that respected their collective nature. "We're not trying to separate you," she explained. "We want to understand how you experience existence. The Confederation's diplomatic archives would later describe this moment as a turning point in interstellar relations. The humans weren't just another species. They were a bridge-building civilization. Each interaction revealed layers of complexity. The human team didn't just collect cultural information. They participated. They showed genuine interest that went beyond academic study or diplomatic necessity. With the silicon-based Gemulon, they discussed complex mathematical theories. With the energy-based Luminary, they explored concepts of consciousness that transcended physical existence. The methane-breathing Clorax found humans discussing atmospheric chemistry with a depth that suggested true partnership. Ambassador Lorak of the Trilateral Cluster watched these interactions with growing comprehension. They're not expanding, he realized. They're connecting. The human approach challenged fundamental assumptions about interstellar interaction. They didn't seek to dominate or categorize. They sought to understand. Each cultural exchange was a dialogue, not a transaction. Dr. Rodriguez summarized their approach in a statement that would become legendary in diplomatic circles. Every civilization is a story waiting to be understood, not a problem waiting to be solved. As the cultural exchange progressed, something remarkable happened. Species that had existed in isolation for millennia began to see each other differently. The humans weren't just facilitating communication. They were demonstrating a model of interaction based on genuine curiosity and respect. The Interstellar Cultural Exchange Station became more than a diplomatic location. It transformed into a living laboratory of possibility, where the boundaries between species began to blur. Humanity had arrived not as conquerors or explorers, but as students of existence itself. The classified archive room of the Galactic Confederation was a place of absolute security. Quantum encrypted walls shifted and adapted, preventing any unauthorized access. But today, something unprecedented was happening. Dr. Krina, the Xylaxian communications specialist who had first detected the human vessel, had been granted unprecedented access to a cache of intercepted and decoded communication logs from the human mission. What she discovered was nothing short of revolutionary. The mission wasn't a military expedition. It wasn't even a traditional exploration initiative. It was something far more complex, a carefully orchestrated effort of galactic healing. The first log dated back to the vessel's pre-departure briefing. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood before a diverse team that defied traditional understanding of organizational structure. Not a military command, not a scientific expedition, but something in between. Our mission, she had said, her voice captured in quantum-preserved audio, is to understand the fractures in galactic civilization and help create pathways to healing. Each team member represented a different approach to this complex goal. Dr. Marcus Chen, the xenobiological specialist, focused on systemic understanding. Dr. Aria Chen, the linguistic expert, concentrated on communication barriers. The engineering team led by Commander David Chen approached problems as intricate systems waiting to be optimized. The logs revealed a mission architecture that was breathtakingly ambitious. They weren't just exploring. They were diagnosing. Detailed analyses showed how the human vessel had been collecting information about long-standing conflicts, environmental challenges, and communication breakdowns between various galactic civilizations. But they weren't gathering this information for traditional intelligence purposes. They were creating comprehensive healing strategies. A communication log with the Quantum Harmonics Institute revealed their approach. Where most species would see a territorial dispute, the humans saw a complex system of misunderstandings. Where diplomatic missions would propose compromises, the humans proposed complete reframing of the conflict. One particular log caught Dr. Krina's attention. A conversation between Captain Rodriguez and her mission strategists discussed a conflict between two species that had lasted for over 700 standard cycles. "We're not here to end their conflict," Rodriguez said. "We're here to help them understand why the conflict exists in the first place." The mission logs painted a picture of a civilization that viewed problems not as obstacles, but as complex systems waiting to be understood. Each challenge was an opportunity for comprehensive solution building. Environmental restoration projects showed similar depth. When the humans encountered a dying ecosystem, they didn't just implement preservation strategies. They worked to understand the entire systemic context, geological, biological, cultural, that had led to the ecosystem's decline. Dr. Krina discovered something even more profound. The human vessel carried what they called restoration seeds, advanced technological and biological packages designed to help damaged ecosystems regenerate. These weren't simple terraforming tools. They were complex, adaptive systems that could reconstruct entire planetary environments. The mission's financial and resource allocation logs were equally revealing. Traditional galactic expeditions were funded by specific governmental or corporate entities. The human mission was supported by a complex network of academic institutions, cultural organizations, and what appeared to be crowd-funded initiatives. They weren't representing a single governmental body. They were representing a collective desire to understand and heal. Communication logs with various species showed a consistent approach. Instead of presenting solutions, they asked questions. Instead of offering quick fixes, they proposed collaborative understanding. One log, in particular, stood out. A conversation with a Gemulon cultural historian revealed the depth of their approach. "We're not here to change your civilization," the human representative explained. "We're here to help you understand your own potential for growth." The true nature of the mission became clear. This wasn't an exploration of space. It was an exploration of possibility. Dr. Krina realized something profound. The human vessel represented more than a technological marvel. It was a living demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to existence. They weren't conquerors. They weren't even traditional explorers. They were healers. Systemic, comprehensive, deeply empathetic healers of galactic civilization. As she completed her analysis, Dr. Krina understood that humanity had arrived with a mission far more complex and beautiful than anyone had initially comprehended. They had come to help the galaxy understand itself. The Galactic Confederation Historical Archive would later mark this moment as the true beginning of the interstellar collaborative era. What had started with a single human vessel had transformed the fundamental understanding of intergalactic relations. The changes were subtle at first, then overwhelmingly profound. Ambassador Krina, now a senior diplomatic strategist, stood before the assembled representatives of 17 different species. Her Zalaxian form shimmered with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was about to present a comprehensive report on the human intervention's long-term impacts. The primary conference chamber of the Galactic Hub was a marvel of xenoengineering. 17 different environmental zones coexisted seamlessly, each supporting the unique physiological requirements of the assembled delegates. Atmospheric compositions shifted, gravity fields adjusted, communication spectrums merged and separated in a complex dance of technological accommodation. The human intervention, Krina began, was not a moment. It was a transformation. The holographic display behind her came to life, showing a complex network of interactions that had emerged in the wake of the human vessel's mission. Conflict zones that had existed for millennia had been reimagined. Environmental systems that were on the brink of collapse had been restored. Communication barriers that had seemed insurmountable had been dismantled. The mechanical consensus representative, a complex quantum computational entity, processed the data with clinical precision. Statistical analysis confirms unprecedented systemic improvement, it announced. Conflict resolution rates increased by 327%. Collaborative scientific research expanded by 412%. Resource optimization improved by 268%. But the numbers told only a fraction of the story. The human approach had introduced a fundamentally different way of understanding existence. Where previous galactic interactions had been transactional, they had become collaborative. Where diplomatic missions had sought compromise, they now sought comprehensive understanding. Dr. Arya Chen, who had been part of the original mission, now led the Interstellar Collaborative Research Institute. Her work had transformed how different species approached scientific discovery. No longer were research initiatives confined to single species or limited perspectives. They had become truly collaborative endeavors. The Nebular Concordance delegation shared a remarkable story. A complex quantum communication network, initially developed through human intervention, now allowed their collective consciousness to communicate with other species in ways previously thought impossible. Cultural exchange had become a living, breathing ecosystem of understanding. The Clorax representative demonstrated a breakthrough in atmospheric engineering that had been impossible before human intervention. Technologies developed through collaborative research had transformed their ability to adapt to changing environmental conditions. "We are no longer isolated civilizations," the Clorax representative explained. "We are a collective possibility." The most profound changes were almost imperceptible. Diplomatic protocols had transformed. Where previous interactions had been about territory and resource management, they were now about mutual growth and understanding. The humans had introduced a concept that went beyond diplomacy, a genuine interest in collective potential. Ambassador Lorak of the Trilateral Cluster reflected on the transformation. "They didn't conquer us," he said. "They invited us to understand ourselves." The technological innovations were equally remarkable. Quantum communication systems developed through human collaboration had transformed how different species understood each other. Medical technologies that could support multiple biological systems became standard. Ecological restoration techniques allowed damaged planetary systems to regenerate in ways previously considered impossible. But the most significant change was philosophical. The concept of the other had fundamentally transformed. Species that had existed in isolation or conflict for millennia now saw themselves as part of a larger, interconnected system. The humans had not imposed this understanding. They had simply demonstrated its possibility. Dr. Marcus Chen, now leading the Interspecies Collaborative Healing Initiative, summarized the transformation. "We didn't come to change you. We came to help you see the potential within yourselves." Krina's final presentation slide captured the essence of the transformation. It was a simple network diagram showing the interconnections between different species, not as separate entities, but as a living, breathing ecosystem of possibility. The human vessel that had first entered the sector was no longer just a ship. It had become a symbol of a new way of existing. As the conference concluded, something profound hung in the air. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had arrived not as conquerors, not as explorers, but as a bridge between what was and what could be.